right and center. I'm Nidhi Razdan. Tonight, the world has reacted with widespread condemnation to President Donald Trump's announcement that the United States is pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement. But what surprised many as well was his tirade against India, where he accused New Delhi of trying to extract what he called billions and billions of dollars in foreign aid from the developed world for the climate accord. That's actually not true. But what will this mean for the fight against climate change, first of all, and does this cast a shadow on the Prime Minister's visit to the United States later this month? Well, joining us on the program tonight, we have with us Dr. Ajay Mathur, the Director General of TERI, who is also the Indian negotiator at that Paris meeting that led to this climate accord in 2015. Navroz Dubash, Senior Fellow at the Center for Policy Research, is with us. Douglas Buswine, New Delhi Bureau Chief of Reuters. Mr. G. Parthasarathy, former diplomat, and Rahul Tongia, Senior Fellow at Brookings India, also joining us this evening. Mr. Parthasarathy, let me ask you first, and I want to focus on the diplomatic aspect. This tirade that the US President has launched against India and this accusation about billions and billions and billions in dollars of aid, which isn't even true. Do you think that this actually strikes a pretty sour note with the Prime Minister due to go there in just a few weeks?
Nidhi, why are you surprised? An American friend of mine told me that whether he's tweeting or speaking, President Trump often lives in fantasy land. Now, for example, I'll give you two examples. He says that we are going to double coal production by 2020. Can anyone who knows anything about industry imagine a country can double coal production in 4 years? The other thing is, all this is playing to a small gallery. The Pittsburgh mayor says we don't need coal, we're quite happy with what we're going, and they're going to get a lot of gas. So, firstly, this argument about India doing this and making no commitments, we have made a very difficult commitment. 40% of our electricity production by 2030 will come from either non-carbon fuels, which non-conventional fuels, maybe solar energy, maybe wind energy and the like, low carbon fuels, or and we have also said that we are not asking for foreign aid. The fact of the matter is, does Mr. Trump realize that all that we are getting this year as so-called aid from the United States is $30 million, which is what our IT companies are now paying extra because of his immigration ban?
So in other words, it is going to cast a shadow on the PM's visit, isn't it?
He is the President of the United States.
Yeah.
No, I think, look, he is the President of the United States. Environment is one issue amongst many others. This will be seen as his usual rhetoric, like tweeting at midnight. And we'll go about dealing with him because he's the President of the United States.
Well, we'll have to deal with him.
3.5 million Indians.
Certainly, we'll have to deal with him.
We have large economic interests there.
But it's amazing how he's managed to.
But I'll tell you one thing we will do.
Yeah. So just give me a moment.
The one thing we will do is join with the Europeans
and
everybody else.
That's exactly what I want to talk about. I want to talk about that in just a moment, about what India can do in terms of a leadership role. Dr. Mathur, you were there in Paris. How badly does this hurt today?
Okay. There is clearly a loss of US leadership today. This is a huge challenge, and with the US stepping out, there is a huge void. The good thing is that as each country, whether it's India or China or Europe, takes responsibility for doing what they have pledged, we have multiple leaders, not just one leader. That makes the system a lot more robust. There are chances, therefore, that this could be a positive thing. The second is that the pillars on which climate action would occur, renewables and energy efficiency, are moving in a direction where the economics are making them viable themselves. Even in India, solar electricity is now cheaper than coal electricity. A very large amount of climate action now, if countries, including India, continue with getting their policies right, this will start happening. This will become the economic preference. The US action will certainly delay things. It will lead to lower acceleration. It will be difficult for us to reach more ambitious targets than what we have pledged. But I think For example, in India, the kinds of policies that we have put in place, which have led to the LED program or the renewables program, will help us to meet our targets. They will help many states in the US to meet their targets. The challenge is, how do we help lead us all to more ambitious goals? That's where the problem will occur.
I find it interesting that you do see a silver lining in this. Do you agree with that, Mr. Dubhash? Because at the end of the day, the US, though, is such a key component of all of this, and funding is another issue. I mean, a large part of the funding that countries like India would have got to switch to cleaner technologies would have come from a country like the United States. Now, once that goes, it does make things much, much more difficult.
Yes, I think I broadly agree with Dr. Mathur. I don't think one can tell a story about how this is a good outcome. It's not. It would be preferable if this had not happened. At the same time, many of the negatives, in a sense, were already going to happen given this administration. Money was not going to be forthcoming. He made that clear in his budget and in an earlier executive order on energy. That was simply not going to happen. He was not going to be very cooperative in the context of negotiating further all the mechanisms of the Paris Agreement. Again, that was predetermined. So I think there are a couple of silver linings. One is that it's possible that with the US having given notice they're going to pull out, they will be in less of a position to be interfering in a negative way in the negotiations around the future of Paris. I think that is a silver lining. The second is that the other option President Trump was reportedly considering was to stay in the Paris Agreement but lower the US pledge. That, to my mind, would have been more damaging, because that would have set a precedent which other countries would have been tempted to follow. They're not going to be that tempted to follow this precedent because it's a much higher political bar. It's a big deal to pull out. And as Ambassador Parthasarathy said, if countries now close ranks, as they're showing signs of doing, it makes it much harder to pull out. And I think it's very, very important that they close ranks. Very briefly, the third silver lining is the US internal domestic politics now has no option but to really confront how seriously they take this issue. You've seen the mayor of Pittsburgh making a statement, the governor of California. Like there will be a serious and honest debate. Whereas if Trump had stayed, President Trump had stayed in and lowered the pledge, he could have plausibly told environmentalists, well, I gave you what you want, I stayed in, and he could have told his base, I gave you what you want, and it could have diffused the issue. So actually, I think this is a preferable outcome, and it, in a sense, opens some creative spaces. You might see new and creative alliances across countries. You might see activists in various places mobilizing more forcefully. So I think there's a way to turn this into a positive.
Okay, again, very, very interesting there. Douglas, I mean, again, do you agree with that assessment, countries closing ranks, coming together? That's happening now, and maybe because as journalists we tend to be skeptical about everything, but will that last? I mean, how do you make that last? Will there be a temptation, for instance, for China or even India tomorrow to really lower the bar as far as those goals are concerned? It's not binding anyway, but it just makes it so much harder when the money is not coming in, and if, for instance, other countries start backing off a little bit.
I think there would be a natural temptation for India to lower the bar, to lower its commitment, but what we've heard from the Prime Minister in Russia, from senior ministers in the government, they're staying on board, they're fully committed to the programme, regardless of what others do. So I mean, I think that's an important commitment. I mean, coming back to Prime Minister Modi's trip to Washington, yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, the temperature, we may have climate change and global warming, but the temperature and the relationship between India and the United States has cooled by quite a few degrees. And I think Trump has shown a technique which is to almost shake people down and say, okay, this is what I'm prepared to do. I'm going to make a gesture. What's your proposal now? So he's really thrust the ball into the court of India. What is Prime Minister Modi going to bring to the discussion in Washington? He's really putting the ball in India's court, and the flourishing of that relationship between the former President Barack Obama and Prime Minister Modi, well, that's a receding memory. I'm pretty certain, though, as somebody pointed out, that that President Trump will say that Mr. Modi is a great guy when he does go there. But I just want to ask Rahul Tongia of Brookings on that question of countries closing ranks and new alliances. Do you really believe as well that this is an opportunity for countries like India and China to take the lead on this? Do you think that we can get together on this?
I think countries will keep their pledges, and it's not quite clear what it means to close rank, in the sense we already have a flexible Paris Agreement, which countries are standing behind. And so as long as they continue to do what they can, and thanks to technology improving, countries are poised to perhaps do even better than their pledges if things continue in terms of prices of solar power, prices of other clean technology, energy efficiency, and maybe batteries. So I think we're unnecessarily grasping for dramatic change in a new world order. It's like, I think Dr. Mathur put it, it's not just one, but there can be many leaders. And when you talk of India and China, they are already in some ways leaders just because of their vast size, the size of their economies, their growth ahead of them, especially for India, and the size of energy requirement that is ahead of them. I did want to pick up on one point that was raised about this aid, about the money involved. India has, as everyone knows, very ambitious targets for renewable energy. A lot of that requires global funding because of the magnitude of funds, and also because it's an attractive opportunity for global funds which are not earning very much returns. You look at sovereign funds in Europe, you look at negative bank rates in Japan. Compared to that, traditionally, energy projects in India would talk of a 10-12% discount rate for debt funding. There is room to get global money in that becomes a win-win opportunity. And a lot of the things about technology transfer, funding, and all of these are not to come from the US government. They're to come from the private sector or third parties. So in that sense, I'm not very worried. And in fact, India's ambitions and growth in the clean space highlights the opportunity that's there for global stakeholders, including American stakeholders.